So, I mean, I normally don't do intros, but this unique human deserves one. Born from Zimbabwe, raised in London, Melbourne based. I mean, she's kicking your ears with the neo soul goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, I have Kai. How are you doing, sweetheart?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. Yeah, like I was just saying to you before we properly got started, like this is actually the first time in a while that I've been doing a Zoom chat. Whereas everything has opened up in the UK to an extent now. I've been doing a lot more events and human interaction. So coming back to a Zoom chat feels a bit weird, but it's nice at the same time. Because knowing I know, I was thinking, do I still know how to set one up? Like, is it it's a bit crazy, man. I mean, how are things on your side? I mean, you were just telling me that you're on your sixth lockdown.
Yeah, so Melbourne is in lockdown number six. We've definitely
Wow.
we've been the most locked down state in Australia. So we spent most of last year in lockdown. We came out for a little bit of summer, went straight back into a lockdown, and we've just been in and out. This is our fourth lockdown this year, so we're getting kind of
Wow.
used to it. Yeah,
I mean, it's crazy because I would have thought by now that there would have been at least, a lot of leniency going forward. Like, obviously, I'm not going to go into the politics of everything, but you would think that there would be a lot more freedoms, as we're calling it at this stage. Because in the UK, in England in particular, like we're good to an extent. We we still have to wear masks when it comes to like public transport, but a lot of stuff has been lifted as far as you don't have to do so much like that anymore. But I mean, being in our country, you never know what. I mean, you've lived in London like for a good part, so you kind of know how the London lifestyle is. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, how are you keeping like? Because if in our case, being the lockdowns that we've had, which has only been three on our side, and you're on your sixth, so you say.
Yeah.
How does that play on how does it give a play on effect as far as you mentally, because it must be just like going all over the place for you.
Mentally, it's pretty tough. I think in Australia, we're pretty lucky because our cases aren't that high.
Mm.
So when we do come out of lockdown, things do kind of go back to normal. Yeah, it's just we're still getting used to going in and out. But when we are out, it's pretty normal. We have events back on and we have gigs back on to a certain capacity, and everyone kind of moves around as normal again. So we're kind of locked down over like 20 or so cases at the moment. So
Yeah,
yeah.
because I was speaking to an artist called Nori, who's from New Zealand, and she was telling me, like, this was like last year when we had our second interview, and she was telling me that cases are really low, to the point that there was almost zero cases pretty much. And obviously the thing that sticks out in my mind is that, I mean, I even was watching the news earlier that you guys from New Zealand, I don't know if it's the case for Australia as well, that you guys won't be able to do like full on travel like across the world until at least the end of the year. I mean, that must be crazy for you too, knowing that I guess you just want to travel back, knowing that you've traveled for most of your life anyway.
It is difficult. I mean, it's really weird for me not traveling, especially coming out of 2019 when all I did was travel and tour. So, being home for more than 2 weeks is kind of new to me. So, yeah, it's been really interesting because I mean, we do go for weeks with zero cases, but
Mm,
traveling probably won't even be back until mid next year for us.
wow.
Because we're not vaccinated, and the border controls are really really strict here. If we leave the country, we've got to be gone for at least 3 months. So
Mm.
it's not just like popping in and out. You've really got to stay out for a while, and quarantine is long and expensive. So
Mm.
yeah,
I
no
mean,
traveling for us Aussies.
we're gonna get into like doing performances in Australia later, because you have got a few festivals that you'll be covering soon. There's one in November that you'll be doing as well. It's like a comedy slash music festival that you're doing. But in general, like before COVID was a thing, like in terms of like you performing and you know going into like the music career that you're leading into, like how's that as like the differences between that and obviously here now, where you're having to constantly be in at home? Like, you know, how do you reflect on those sort of times?
It's definitely changed my artistry, and I think in really positive ways too, to be honest, because 2019, 2018, I was touring in 4 different bands in lots of different roles, whether that was backing vocalist or lead vocalist or whatever it was. And I was just everywhere all the time. And that was kind of, the trajectory of my career was kind of mixing in between doing the backing vocalist work and kind of doing some stuff with other bands. And it was keeping me busy, but it definitely wasn't giving me as much time to lean into my personal artistry and like my solo project. So being forced to be at home with my own thoughts and, having to just stay home and write and stay home and work on myself has been actually really amazing for my artistry. And I think I've written the best songs that I've written, and I've made work that I'm really, really proud of in the last 18 months, just because I've had nothing else to do. I've had nowhere else to go. So it's been great. I mean, just having all this time undistracted has been really, really good.
So you must have had a lot of reflection time as well, considering like you just said, you're not able to go as much anywhere at the moment, apart from when you do get lifted from restrictions and then put back in again. I guess it's a thing for you where it's like, it's allowed yourself to think, how do I improve on my artistry, and how do I get to the point of, because it's got to the point now, like, you're doing interviews, you're getting publicity out there. So it must have had a bittersweet moment for you.
It is bittersweet. I think I didn't really see it coming. I didn't think, that I would be able to sort of start any momentum up in COVID. So that's been the really sweet part in terms of, I've been able to achieve so much still, even though I've been, stuck in one city or stuck in one place. So that's kind of been pretty incredible in itself. And I think my artist project has just taken a whole new trajectory and a whole new direction since COVID. So I'm still pretty grateful for, being locked in and whatever. But yeah, it's.
But you want to be out though. You want to be out like completely
I want to
now.
I want to be out. But I think now when we are allowed to travel and we are allowed to be out, I think, there's just a whole new direction that I'm going to go in that I didn't anticipate for myself this early on. So I'm excited to see how that goes too.
Well, something that has been consistent with you that I've noticed is that, your fashion sense, because I saw on your IG stories yesterday that you were wearing a vest and you said that your mum hated it.
She actually had to convince me not to wear any of my vests for this interview.
Oh my God, Mum, that would have been so perfect. Why did you? Mums are the best in most things, but come on, Mum. Obviously, you a lot of like your pictures that you have on the gram, like you're pretty colourful as far as the stuff that you wear. You would think as well, considering you have a Zimbabwean background and a lot of traditional clothing is pretty colourful, it's pretty patterned and everything else. So then why would your mum hate on you? I don't understand.
I don't know, she's funny, but she's just like, no, not the vests again. It makes you look like a little boy.
Wow.
My friends do have a running joke though. They used to say, I look like a 10-year-old who found $50 on the street. Because I love wearing just, I love my bright colors and my bright patterns. And like everyone in Melbourne is just like, standard Melbourne uniform is black, white, grey. And right. I'm just walking down the street in like bright green and bright pink and purple. And everyone's like, why is she dressed like that?
Is it something that you're conscious of, knowing that obviously, you got your hair that you got popping off, or like you got your fashion that you got popping off. Was it something that you were conscious of as a child, or did that develop as far as wanting to create an identity later on?
I think so. I think it's more of a childhood thing, because when I look at my like childhood photos, I honestly dress the exact same way still.
Wow.
Like my parents always said that I was very in charge of my own fashion, even as a kid. Wouldn't let anyone
not necessarily, knowing that your mum said to you that for this interview that you wouldn't be wearing your vest. So
no vest. She was like, "No, don't do the vest. Please don't do the vest." And I was like, "All right, well, lockdown uniform it is then."
Wow.
But
Me,
no,
me, me,
just
me
as
and
a
your mum have
kid.
got to talk after this.
You gotta have a word with her. I was like, Mum, I didn't buy all these cool vests just to not wear them. But yeah, no, fashion for me has always been something that I've really engaged in, even as a kid. And I loved Barbie. I think that's where it started, of
Okay.
being obsessed with Barbies and like obsessed with dressing them up. And then I wanted to dress the exact same way. And I always wanted to be a pop star as a kid too. So I was like, well, if I wanted to be a pop star, I'm just going to look like a pop star. So I
Mm.
think that kind of just bled into my personality. And now that's just naturally what I go for. Like, I love to be bright and I love weird textures and patterns. And, you know, I love having the gray hair. And I think it's just my personality just spilling out onto a canvas. So,
So,
yeah.
so when it comes to like artists in general, because you were just saying that you were into Barbies as a kid, did that bleed into the sort of like influences that you'd be listening to as far as musically? Was there like, I don't know, for example, was there like a Britney Spears or a Christina Aguilera, them sort of vibes that kind of brought that sort of childhood push to adult in wearing clothes like this to life?
Definitely. For me, it was Kylie Minogue because we had the same name. So,
Oh,
and I
really?
mean,
Oh, right. Obviously,
yeah,
of course, Kai. And is that Kylie actually your government name as far as that then?
yeah, Kylie's my gubby. So,
Right.
so Kylie and Kylie Minogue. So I instantly was drawn to her because I was like, oh, there's another Kylie who's singing. Um, but that's where my heavy pop influences come from, to be honest, from being
Mm.
like really, really into that kind of sound. She was the first kind of door for me into that sound because my parents, you know, loved soul music and they loved Whitney Houston and they loved Michael Jackson. And that's kind of where I learnt to sing. But yeah, listening to Kylie Minogue was kind of where I started being a little bit more interested in pop. And I guess that played into the whole like Barbie girl pop music, you know, bright pink kind of whole thing. So
Right.
that's,
Okay.
yeah, those are the little pieces.
Okay, so I'm getting some of the pieces put together, so it kind of makes sense where like all the where all the colors come in, where all the singing influences come in, where like you both share the same name of Kylie, and then being an Australian, like a native from there, like you seem to pick up a lot of influences whilst living in Australia. But I mean, let's get into it then. I mean, because your story is interesting. Like I said at the top of this interview, that you've come from all different places. I mean, let's start off with you being born in Zimbabwe. Like,
Yeah.
talk me through like how long you were there for. Like, obviously you being born there. Like, how long were you there for until you moved over to London?
So I was 3 when I moved to London. So there wasn't a lot of time spent, you know, as a young kid being in Zim. But I mean, London and Zim being 8 hours on a flight, I was there, you know, every year. So always going back and forth between London and Zim for a really, really long time. So I kind of had the upbringing in both places. Um, so yeah, it was an interesting culture shock because I think, you know,
I was
being
gonna
3 years
ask
old,
that. Yeah.
being 3 years old, you kind of expect that you don't notice things shift so radically, but I really, really did. It was like one of the first things, you know, that I remember about being a kid was coming over to the UK and being like, oh, everything is completely different to how
Mm.
they are in Zimbabwe, and going to school and being like, I don't know how to interact. And, you know, like English was my first language, but it was still like, I just felt like I was speaking a totally different language to everybody else.
Did you feel
Yeah,
did you
it was
feel like a did you feel like an outcast at any point, or did you feel like you were able to blend in, like coming from Zimbabwe back and forth?
a little bit outcasted at the beginning, but I think because I was in Ealing Broadway is where I moved to first. So obviously, like very culturally diverse and like lots of people coming in from different countries, and so I think everybody kind of blended in that way, in that we were all coming from different places. So
Mm.
it wasn't too hard to blend. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, being London is like multicultural anyway. Like from my experiences growing up, like when I was in primary school, I was the only mixed black kid in the entire class, and that coming then going into secondary school, like that was a big change because then it was all mixes, like from Asians to blacks to whites to all the ethnic minorities, all different types of people. So then that was like a something I had to adapt through, you know, going through school days. And obviously now, even coming to this point, it's like I'm still kind of learning, like even though most of my friends are from ethnic minority backgrounds. So like you growing up like in and we're going to talk about you transitioning from London to Australia in a bit, but you blending in London, like did that allow you in terms of being influenced further as far as like seeing different cultures and then having that applied to your music? Did that help in any way?
Massively, massively, massively. I'd never had a friendship group that was, you know, predominantly one culture or one background. So it was like always going to a different friend's house and experiencing different music and different food and different fashion and just like being heavily influenced by all the different cultures coming together, I think was such a great thing to experience as a young person because it was just like, oh, I'm this little Zimbabwean girl and now I'm experiencing Indian culture.
Right.
And now I'm experiencing, you know, even like Eastern European culture and just all these different cultures coming together. So I think it was really, really eye-opening being that young and realizing, oh, the world is actually a really, really big place. Yeah.
Crazy. I mean, you just made me thought. I mean, in terms of like the food, because obviously, you know, experiencing different cultures. Like, did you pick up any food that becomes your favorite to this day?
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. Um, so my favorite cuisine is definitely like it's either between Vietnamese or Chinese food, and
Ooh.
I picked that up from like a baby, baby, baby. Like I remember the first time I tried Chinese food, I was probably like two because there was like one Chinese restaurant in like my area in Zim, and then we got to the UK, and there was
They
like
were all
an
over.
array all over the place, and I was like overwhelmed. But to this day, it is still my absolute favorite cuisine. I love Asian cuisine.
Mm. So, what would be your go-to if you have like a, you know, Asian cuisine? What would it be if you're going to if you're going to a restaurant right now? What would be the one thing that you would order on the menu?
You know what's really funny is that Chinese food is super different in the UK than it is to here.
Really?
Super, super, super different. So in the same way that like if I was in London, I'd probably get like a chicken chow mein or something
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
yeah.
crispy seaweed or whatever. They really don't do chow mein out here like that.
Wow. So, what, what,
Yeah.
what,
So
what,
like
what's the sort of cuisines that are different to over here then that they would do?
so you'd probably get if you were looking for like a simple noodle dish, you'd get like a char kway teow, which is like a Chinese Malay kind of thing, like flat rice noodles. Is so different to like just ordering like your
Wow.
usual chow mein. I think it's like because we're so close to Asia
Mm,
as a continent,
okay,
like
okay, that makes sense.
yeah, we have like a huge variety of Asian food and like a lot of Asian people who have moved over from Asia who have opened up their restaurants here. So there's like the menu is huge.
I
It's
bet it.
very,
I bet
very,
it
very
is.
big.
I bet it's more like
Yeah.
versatile as well, like you just said, because you're closer to Asia than the Western world. I mean, interestingly, you just made me think this as well. Like before we get into you transitioning to Australia, like I mean, the Eastern world compared to the Western world, I mean, it's completely different, like in all different ways, whether it be through the way we live, like politics, everything. So you being in Australia, we're going to go into that in a minute, but like, what would you say are the biggest differences as far as like how people live lives in general from like the Eastern world to the Western world?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole different cultural mindset between the two worlds. I think even when I go back to London, there's a bit more pace. There's a bit more like you wake up and like your day is hustling already. Do you know what I mean? Like your day's already moving in London.
Right.
Whereas Australia, you could kick back the whole week and it would not make a difference to your week. Because I mean, that's the culture, you know, like everyone is just like super, super chilled out, super relaxed. Even when you're working really hard, there's still kind of like a culture around like, make sure you have a break, mate. Like make sure, you know, you have a couple days to yourself just to chill. So there's definitely that kind of difference. And I mean, our days are a bit longer as well with our weather. So, you know, we get sunlight in the summer from 5 a.m., 4 a.m., all the way up until 9:30, 10 p.m. So we tend to have just a bit of a different lifestyle here where you kick off work at 4:30 and you'll go on until 10 and do it all again. So
yeah. So
yeah.
it's like a consistent thing going on. So it's more relaxed over your side, whereas our side is like go, 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 go. I mean, it's been
Yeah.
even weird on our side, like, through the lockdowns to have to stop all that and to be at
Yeah.
home and kind of reflect on what you guys would naturally be doing anyway, as far as like, make sure you relax. But we've had to do that for like months on end. And it's just like, when I first started, like when it was the lockdowns first, I was like, okay, I can't go out anywhere. I'm in the confines of my own house. What do I do? And I thought, this is weird because I'm always on the go. So for me to
Yeah.
now reflect it and go like, I've actually got time to myself. The one thing that I take away from being in lockdowns is, having more time for yourself. And, obviously, being with your peoples and that, but obviously making sure you have time to yourself. So, I mean, for you being in Australia, I guess it makes not much of a difference really, because knowing that, if it's more relaxed there anyway, it just means you're doing the same thing, except you're just in the confines of your house.
Definitely. I mean, I think even the first few lockdowns here, everyone was kind of like, oh, yeah, more time to go outside and see my mates and walk around and just do what I would usually be doing. But now I'm kind of forced to do it. So that's kind of nice. But yeah, just a totally different experience, different pace.
Mm.
So yeah, coming to London is always just like that moment when my brain has to re-engage again and go, all right, we're going. Yeah.
I bet it's like, oh, switch on, and then it's like you have to switch off again when you're back in Australia. It must be, it must kick your ass sometimes. Thinking like, why?
Absolutely, it does. It really, really does.
That's crazy, man. I mean, obviously musically, as far as let's still come back to London. So obviously, how long were you in London before you transitioned into Australia?
8 years.
8 years. So in the
Mm.
in those 8 years, musically, like, what were the influences then? Because obviously you were saying that you were playing with Barbie dolls, and then Kylie Minogue was a big influence. But being in London,
Mm.
like, what influences like captured you whilst you were here?
There's so many, and it's like just a mixture of whatever was playing on Radio 1 at the
Mm.
time is like, just I remember I used to know all the words to everything, like DB Boulevard, Point of View, Superman Lovers, Starlight, Jamiroquai was a huge one.
Oh,
Jamiroquai was a huge one because
yes.
I mean we weren't playing that out in Zimbabwe. So when we got here, it was like when we got to London, I mean, it was like, who is that? You know what I mean? Like that was
My
super,
favorite
super,
from
super
Jamiroquai is
crazy.
like Space Cowboy. I love that song.
Oh, yes, yes. My favorite is Love Philosophy.
Yeah, that just got me.
It just like, yeah, totally blew my mind. And then I was obsessed with the Sugar Babes, absolutely obsessed with the Sugar Babes. And I started my own girl band at school because I was like, I want to be like the Sugar Babes. So
So
yeah, no,
who are you in the group? Were you Keisha?
yes, definitely.
Yeah. I thought it would be the case
Definitely.
anyway. Yeah.
But yeah, no, just lots of girl bands. Also, boy bands it wasn't really a thing in Zimbabwe. So like getting to the UK and being like, oh, people are like in whole bands, like a whole group of guys. Like that's really, really interesting.
Okay.
So I think my brother kind of followed that tip a little bit. He loved Michael Jackson, would impersonate all the moves, and he kind of stumbled across boy bands and was like, what's going on here?
Who was your favorite
So,
boy
yeah.
band?
Oh, Busted. No, McFly.
Okay.
Definitely
Okay.
McFly.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely McFly. I had a McFly obsession for a really long time. It's embarrassing, but just obsessed, super obsessive.
Would it have been the point that if ever like you got to meet McFly as a kid, would you be one of those girls that go, I love you, I love you, I love you, Would you be like that?
I don't know, actually. I always thought I would be the kind of person who would get starstruck. But I think
Right.
as I've met artists that I really, really admire, or like really huge artists in my career, I haven't freaked out at all. And
That's
I
a
always
that's a
thought that
good way to
I would.
see it as well, because then you're in that field, so it's like you don't. I mean, for me personally, if it was The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, I would freak out like a fanboy. But outside of that, like I've met so many celebrities over the years, and it's just like, they're no different to you and me. So, but it's just the fact that you're
Exactly.
in the same room as them.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I would have freaked out over McFly, but yeah, no, I think I've definitely surprised myself with being able to keep it in check and not being too starstruck. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I hear that. I hear that. So, I mean, let's go into the transition of now for being in London to Australia. I mean, why the move?
So the move happened because my parents were expecting another baby, so my little brother, and we were living in Bedford at the time, which is just outside of London. And yeah, we were kind of just, I think my parents kind of, they do this thing where they get to a point and they go, oh, well, what do we want for the future? How do we want to raise our children? And, do we want more space? Do we want to be able to go somewhere where we can, have a big plot of land or whatever it is and raise four kids and whatever it is? So I think they just got the idea of, oh, let's just try somewhere new. Let's try and see if we can just go to another country and, do it all again. Because I mean, they had moved from Zimbabwe on a whim. Like they took a really big risk doing that. And they were, my age when they did that. Um, so I think they always kind of just get to this place where they go, okay, let's go and just try something new. Let's take another risk. So I think, from having the idea to moving was maybe 6 months.
Mm.
So yeah, they kind of just said, yep, let's pack up, let's go. We were originally going to the States, and
Right.
somewhere along the lines, Australia came into play, and we just ended up here. So
I mean, to me, like from the outside point of view, like that seems like a completely random sort of occurrence. It's just like, okay, let's just go to Australia. Like, but
yeah.
obviously, like you guys had sort of planned it. Like, you originally wanted to go to the States, and then thinking Australia. Like, you guys were thinking like you wanted more space. So, like, where? How did you guys get to the conclusion that Australia was going to be your final home, so to say?
Yeah, I don't actually know if my parents even knew that it would be our final home. I think it was just this, I don't know, just this pull of let's just go and see if it works.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, we had so much family in the UK, and my mum had a sister who had lived in Melbourne briefly and then moved to New Zealand. Um, so yeah, I think there was always the idea in our minds that if it didn't work, we could always come back, but we would never know what it would be like if we didn't just go.
Hmm.
Um, so I think for them, it was just let's just go risk it. I mean, we didn't even have anywhere to live when we got here.
Wow. So you
So
literally just went, you just took the plane, you just went there and just thought, okay, we're here now. What do we do next?
yeah, pretty much. That's
Wow.
that's exactly what happened. And I mean, dad got a job out here shortly before we got here. He's a nurse, so the
Right.
hospital put us up in like patient accommodation for a few weeks while my parents like found us somewhere to live. And it just everything just seemed to kind of be let's just do it off the top of our heads. Let's just improvise the whole thing. And I mean, it's worked out. It's been good, but I think it was definitely a huge risk.
And how long have you been in Australia now? So we can count up the numbers.
So I can't do maths in my head that quickly. 10 or 11 years now.
Okay, so that's the longest that
Yeah.
you've stayed in a country. And do you feel
Yeah.
like you fully have adjusted now to like the ways of life in Australia, knowing that you've had, similar amount of time in London, but now you've moved over to Australia? Like, do you feel like you suit more in Australia as opposed to London now? Know you've lived there for longer?
I don't 100% think so. I think I did feel that way before I came back to London. So it had been easily 10 years since I had been back to London. Just hadn't traveled back. And obviously, I was a teenager and there wasn't really any going back unless my parents were going back. So when I came back to London was really the first time that I actually realized how much of an English girl I probably am at heart.
Mm.
I came back and it was just like immediately I was like, yep, this is my place. This is actually home for me. So coming back to Australia was like, oh, actually being in Australia is really different to what I'm used to.
Right.
So then every time I would kind of go back to London, I would get that feeling again of like, oh, I'm home. I'm where I'm supposed to be. So it's a weird adjustment. I think every time that I've traveled back has kind of reminded me that, oh, actually this is where I'm from. So yeah, I think it's quite easy to come to Australia and just assimilate because everyone's kind of going through the same thing, especially, you know, parents of immigrants, because not parents, children of immigrants,
Right.
um, going through a similar thing, because it's this thing of like, oh, Australia is where I live, but you know, there's definitely a sense of having a home elsewhere. And I think a lot of people my age are in that same sort of boat.
Okay. When we think Australia, like I wanted to, get your idea about influences because when we think Australia, when it comes to artists, you think you were saying earlier about Kylie Minogue, there's AC/DC, Iggy Azalea, Natalie Imbruglia as well. And then when you think of like actors as well, like Hugh Jackman, Chris Hemsworth, Nicole Kidman, Margot Robbie, Mel Gibson, the list goes on as far as like famous acts. Would it be cheesy to say that any of them had played a part of you living in Melbourne when you made that jump to come to Australia? Did they play a part as far as like movie watching or music influences, that sort of thing?
Massively. So mum used to watch a lot of Neighbours.
Ah,
So
was it? Is Home and Away another one as well?
yeah, Home and
Right,
Away.
right, yeah.
So Neighbours is actually filmed in Melbourne.
Right.
So that was a bit of a no-brainer because it was kind of like, well, we should just go to the place where they filmed Neighbours. That place looks great. But yeah, of course, Hugh Jackman, another massive one. Um, yeah, just I think that's all we knew of Australia at the time was actually the iconic, famous Australians.
Hmm. So, I
Yeah.
mean, were there any particular movies that you were watching from that time period as well? Like, you think like, oh, that's significant to being, oh, I love this actor, I love this actress.
Any significant ones? Oh, easily X-Men, because dad is a
Ooh.
big superhero guy. So that was my first introduction, of course, to Hugh Jackman as
Right.
Wolverine.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that would have been the one. Trying to think of anything like that would have been super Australian because I know my parents were a bit sneaky. Before they told us we were coming, they just slowly started like putting more Australian TV like on our TV, and I'd be like, "What is this?" And like, "Oh, Australian."
Wait, so were they kind of teasing you in the prospect of, oh, we're not actually going to tell you that we're going to move to Australia, but we're going to put some of this into your brainwaves just to kind of let you
Yep.
know that this is kind of what could be expected for our futures.
Yes. So then the first true conversation we had about it was that dad got me into the car and he's like, let's go to Tesco. We're going to go buy a Barbie. And I was like, all right,
Okay.
that's bait. That's bait. And we're in the car and he was like, so if I said we might move countries, what would you think? And I was like, where? And he was like, oh, that show we've been watching.
They could have just been bait with you straight away and say we're moving to Australia. No, they had to look little teasers in there.
No, they just had to like sprinkle it in because they knew that like if they'd just been like we're moving, I would have been like, well, see you guys, have fun in Australia. I'm staying here.
And how would you have felt if they said to you we're moving to Australia? Would you have felt any differently, or was it just did it pan out the way it was supposed to?
I think it panned out the way it was supposed to. I think
Yeah.
if they had just straight up told me, I would have been devastated. I would have kicked up the biggest fuss. Um, but yeah, no, I think it's all panned out the way that it was supposed to.
And it certainly has, because I mean, other artists that you've been working with, like from Australia, like Sampa the Great, Genesis Owusu, Rule, Meg Mac, Jessica Malboy, Billy Davis. I mean, majority of them similar to you, where they've had that story of coming from from Africa and then moving to Australia. Like, it's weird to me, but it's good at the same time. Where knowing there's like a community of you, where like you feel like you can connect in that way, knowing you've had those experiences. I mean, how does it feel that you can connect with people that have had similar stories to you?
Honestly, incredible. It's been one of the biggest game changers for my music because, all of a sudden it's like, here's someone who's having a parallel experience to me, and we can just come together and make music, and that's how we connect because it's like, our stories are really similar and we've come from different countries and we're just making music in like a essentially a country that we don't really know as much about because we haven't grown up here like everybody else. And
Mm.
yeah, it is actually really interesting to get into the studio with people who've experienced, a similar kind of story, especially with Sampa, because Sampa moved around a lot as well. Went from Zambia to Botswana, then to the States, and then over to Australia, and then
Wow.
also spent a lot of time in the UK as well. So, we'd had such a parallel experience in that way of culture shock multiple times.
I bet you should have the hashtag on your profile saying culture shock. Like my life is a
Yeah.
culture shock.
My life is a culture shock. It
Because
really is.
because even on your IG, like I noticed that one of your taglines is I became a singer, not a doctor. Sorry, mum.
Yeah, I'm a pop star, not a
I'm a
doctor.
pop star, not a doctor. Yeah. So I mean, when you spoke to your parents about it before we get into your singles, like when you spoke to them and saying you wanted to be a pop star, like what were their initial thoughts like going into it? Because as your tagline says, like I want to be a pop star, not a doctor.
Terrified. They were absolutely terrified. I mean, they'd always known about me singing. They'd always known that I'd loved singing, and it was a big part of my life. But I started going to uni, and I was pre-med, and I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do medicine. I want to go and do full-time music. And that was just, yeah, that was mind-blowing for them. Especially, coming from Zim, you don't really hear of anyone not going to uni and going off to become a pop star, and I didn't know much about the music industry, and they didn't know anything about the music industry. So I think that thought of like, oh my God, is it going to be okay? Is she going to be able to make a living? Like, what is her life going to look like? What does failure look like in the music industry? What do you fall
Mm,
back on? All that kind of thing. So it's been a process,
mm,
and they've been learning. The more I've learned about music industry and the more comfortable I feel in this space, the more comfortable they feel. So they've
mm.
been amazing and supportive and have helped me with so much of my career. Like there is so much I would not have been able to do if my parents didn't help me.
Oh.
So
So it's
yeah,
like a turnaround, really. It's just like the initial thought of like how they're gonna react, and now it's just like, yeah, whatever we can do to support your career, we're here for you.
exactly,
No, it's
exactly.
exactly that. I mean, so let's talk about your catalog then. So, obviously, sometimes is one of your major singles, like your first start. You've actually like started like music quite recently, as far as like putting like material out there. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm conscious as to know why you wanted to bring out music now, as opposed to where there's artists I've spoken with, they've done music way before in the past. Why now at this point, so early on in your career, to really bring out music at this stage?
I just think that this is the moment that I felt the most ready
Right.
and the most just like I think when you first start making music, you have this mindset of, oh, am I going to make something that people like? And I think I've evolved in my thinking of gone, am I going to make something that people resonate with? And if I want people to resonate with it, I've got to resonate with it.
Mm.
And I think I've just gotten to that stage, in my life as a young woman, as well as a musician, that I've gone, yeah, now I can write something from a point of view where I understand and I relate. So when I put that out there, other people are going to understand and relate. So it's a timing thing of being like, yeah, the time is right now.
Mm. And of course, like you got Sometimes out there at the moment. So let's go into that. Obviously, it shows a visual representation of a relationship breakdown. I mean, you acted out pretty well. I'm surprised you're not even going into acting as part of another avenue for your career, because like throwing pillows and throwing shit out all across, thinking like I hate you, all that stuff. So with that song, was it something you experienced as far as like a breakup or a breakdown in a relationship?
Definitely. I mean, I was watching a lot of relationships around me break down as well as friendships, but I went through my first major breakup from my like first proper boyfriend. And I
Mm,
think the concept behind Sometimes was really our relationship is that we didn't understand why we weren't working,
mm,
but we just got to that point where we were like, you know what? I don't want to hate you and I don't want you to hate me. And if we continue on in this relationship, we're just going to tear each other apart.
mm.
So we just decided to call it quits in this way of we don't understand what happened between us, but it is what it is.
Mm. And I mean, you don't have to go too intense with it, but like, are you still friends with the person in question that we're talking about, as far as like in relation to the song?
Yeah. So we went a while without speaking to each other, and we've only recently come back into each other's lives, and it's been super positive because he was my
Mm.
best friend before he was my
Oh.
boyfriend. So it's like, he actually did message me when the song came out, and he was like, "This song is so beautiful, and I'm so glad that you put it out there, and it's so honest, and it made him so emotional, and it made me
Oh.
emotional." Yeah, it's been really great to rekindle that friendship and actually be able to look back on our relationship and go, oh my God, like we were kids and, it was silly and we learned so much from it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I mean, and obviously, like, that's I like that positive story. Like, most of the time when it comes to like breakups, it's like literally like we don't speak no more. That's it. I'm done. Like, he's an asshole. She's a bitch. All them sort of vibes there. But like, what's good in this scenario is that you've, not only musically that it's helped you, but also like, to rekindle a friendship that you already had before you went into a relationship. So gold is like a massive representation of like, things can still be positive even though, we're no more, we can still make things work.
Exactly.
No, I
Exactly.
hear that. And then, of course, gold as well. Yeah. Now, I like the song because it's a mixture of melodic rap and singing, and I love that. I love those combinations. It kind of puts me in the mind of a little bit of a Missy Elliott in a way. Like, obviously, she raps, but she has that way of making it R&B and making it like really like a good impact as far as like pop and rap R&B sort of vibes. Um, and obviously, from what I've been reading, you wrote this with someone you love, and on a beach, just chilling. So, I guess when it comes to like writing songs, like, does it depend on what scenario you're in at the time to influence you in the way you write music?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes it does. I think a song like Gold is a really great example of being in the right place at the right time,
Mm-hmm.
because the mood was just there. So then when I heard that loop, I think it was only a 45-second or 1 minute loop or something that I'd gotten in like a Dropbox file. And I was like, oh, this is exactly what today feels like. Yeah. And I actually started writing that song and it was about the sun because it was like a beautiful sunny day. And I was just like, oh, look at the sun peering through. And just, yeah, the song just kind of flowed like that. So, I mean, sometimes writing for me is like super situational like that.
Mm.
Other
Because
times you're in a studio. So,
Yeah, because I was even reading that you sometimes write while you're driving as well. So I'm thinking in my head, let's say you're stuck in traffic and then some madness
yeah.
goes on. Like, do you put like, if say like you get angry and say move out the fucking way? Do you apply that as far as like the emotion when you write the songs? Because it must be like
Yes.
it's unpredictable when you're in the car.
Yes. I've written some very angry songs behind the wheel, and I have hilarious voice memos of me being like, you mess with the wrong one. I'm going to come for you.
Man's coming with the rap style, saying like, "Hey, don't mess, fam." Oh,
Yeah. So I love riding in the car. I love riding on trains as well,
okay.
because you see some absolute mess on the train. And you just whip out the notepad and you're like, all right, okay.
What's the craziest thing you seen in a car or on a train, and you thought I had to write about it?
Man, I haven't finished this song yet, but like this happened a couple of years ago. I got into a train. There was like barely anyone on this train, right? In the middle of like a work day. This dude gets on the train and he sits directly opposite me and he just makes dead eye contact with me on this train. And he has this duffel bag, right? He unzips the duffel bag and he pulls out two-liter bottles of milk. And he's dead, like he's staring me dead in the eye, right? He opens up
Okay.
opens up each bottle of milk and starts just chugging milk. Like absolutely chugging milk. Like he was sitting there just drinking these liters and liters of milk and just staring at me. And I just sat there in like total disbelief that this dude was just chugging milk in front of me. And I'm looking at him like, yeah, man. Okay. If
Do
you like that
you?
sometimes.
Do you?
If you like that sometimes. And I was like, man, I've definitely got to write a song about that. Because the mood was just like, you know what, man? Yeah. You drink your milk on the train. Do it. No one's gonna stop you.
I was gonna add, yeah. If you want to add some more lyrics to the song, yeah, you should reference Stone Cold Steve Austin, because you know, like how like wrestling, he would like chuck his beers on the thing. You should add that as far as that crazy guy chunking milk. Yeah.
That's good. I gotta write that down.
Yeah. Hey, well, listen. If the tune comes out and you hear the Stone Cold Steve Austin reference, you know where you heard it first. Trust me.
Exactly.
Trust me. I mean, you've worked with people in Australia. I mean, you know, your beautiful story of having gone from London back and forth, born in Zimbabwe. Like, obviously, you've collaborated with people in Australia. Like, are there people from our side of the turf, as weird as it's to say, because you've lived in London, are there people on our side that you would like to work with?
Oh, so many. So many. So I've started working with a producer actually who lives out there. Her name's Amy McKnight, and she is awesome. I know she has an artist project as well, which would be a great time to remember the artist project name, but she's incredible. We got set up through some publishers on like a Zoom kind of thing, and we've been making some music for my new stuff, which is cool. I love the guys from Blue Lab Beats.
Okay.
They're so sick. Yeah, just people like I've met through touring with Sampa that like she was like, hey, check out these guys, check out these producers. But I also love artists like Tiana Major 9. I'm obsessed with Tiana Major 9. She's so good. Okay. Mahalia. Yeah, you guys have got some good like alternative R&B music out there. It's crazy scene, crazy.
Yeah, we're definitely on the come up with, especially more women in the scene as well. So it's just beautiful to see.
Poppy
like
Judah.
Poppy Judah. Oh, I've heard so much about her. She's killing
incredible.
it. She did a festival the other day. Like one of my friends went, and like she's just obsessed with her.
So good.
Crazy, man. I mean, what are we looking towards next from you? What's the future looking like for Kai? Because with, you know, of course, with, you know, being in Australia now, there's not much you can really do at the moment as you're in another lockdown. Because I was going to say beautifully, like with things opening up, which is not really at the moment. But I mean, obviously, you can perform now. Like you got Lockhart Festival in November. You know, touch wood that still happens. I mean, you've had a single release tour for some times. So what's the future looking like for you? If we can predict it, what are we looking at?
If everything goes to plan, I will get to do the rest of my gold release tour around Australia, which will be incredible, as well as supporting one of the Australian artists out here named Young Franco. He's a really, really cool guy. Supporting him on his tour. Hopefully bringing back some of those Sydney Opera House shows, which will be just a moment.
Yes.
So yeah, excited to do all of that. And of course, get the rest of this EP out and then get this next album out. So lots of work coming from our end, just waiting for those restrictions to relax, and we'll just be firing on all cylinders for sure.
And I'm hoping that the case that you guys can come back over to London ASAP, as in, you know, you've had that experience, but let's just, you know, put that fingers crossed you can travel the world again, because, you know, I miss some of you guys from Australia and New Zealand, man. This is like, get your asses over here, like seriously, like
exactly.
Why?
You gotta come home.
You gotta come home, especially. It'll be like a full circle situation.
Oh, 100%. I'm like itching to come back and play shows and make music, and just like, man, the London music scene is something else. Something else. So I'm just like dying to get back to it, dying to get back amongst it.
Well, I mean, look, fingers crossed, it's coming. No, actually, we'll put it in the universe. It's coming anyway, regardless.
It's coming.
Done and dusted. Honestly, like, I would have preferred if I was like chatting face to face with you, but I've had such a really good time. I hope you have as well. Like, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. That was so fun.
Well, I mean, look, hopefully you get to come over to London. No, we said you are coming back, so it's just a matter of time. So we're putting that in the universe. Well, I mean, I know you got more famous shit to do, so I ain't going to hold you up much longer. if you can tell our audience where they can catch you on all the socials and what's coming up for you, the floor is yours, sweetheart.
You can find me at all of my socials at Get It Kai, GETITKYE. Look me up on Spotify, KYE. My latest song is Gold. You can go and check it out on all of your platforms, actually, not just Spotify. And keep an ear out because something new is dropping very, very soon.
Ooh, love that. And the next time we talk, the next time you come over to London, I want to see you in that vest. Mum, make sure, please. No lockdown outfits.
I will bring all the vests. I will bring all the vests with me.
Right, I will make sure I'm in my most... I mean, look, I'm even wearing yellow, for goodness sake. So
you're color coordinated.
Well, you know, like Pop said in the movies, you gotta get coordinate. You gotta coordinate. So... No, sweetheart, it's been an absolute pleasure. I wish you all the best in your career. And, you know, when you come back to London, we've got to do this again.
Definitely.
All right, cool. Well, I'll let you go, sweetheart. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me.
Of course. See ya.
All right. Peace.